In the 1980s, Australian journalist and filmmaker John Pilger said, "We've got to stop thinking of Vietnam as a war and start thinking of Vietnam as a country." In about 1989, a Minnesota veteran named Steve Sherlock came up with a really simple idea. Veterans who had fought in Vietnam and bled in Vietnam and seen their friends die in Vietnam had not only the right, but the duty to make peace. And so a half a dozen of us went to Vietnam to do just that. On that first trip, we saw little children dying because perfectly competent doctors and nurses couldn't get the simplest kinds of medicine and equipment. The organization that Steve founded, called ASA, or Aid to Southeast Asia, over the next decade or so took millions of dollars of donated medical equipment and supplies to hospitals and clinics in both the north and the south of Vietnam. Those early trips back to Vietnam were a learning experience for us American veterans. We were welcomed by Vietnamese veterans who were our former adversaries. And we learned that the hardest part of reconciliation is not forgiving the other person. The hardest part is allowing yourself to be forgiven. That requires us to admit to ourselves that we may have done something for which we need to be forgiven. In 1995, I helped Le Van Bang, who was then the head of Vietnam's liaison mission in Washington, and who was to become Vietnam's first post-war ambassador to the United States, to write an op-ed about reconciliation that appeared in the Chicago Tribune on the 20th anniversary of the end of the war. In it, I quoted my friend Hoang Nhat An, a former North Vietnamese commander, who on our very first trip back to Vietnam said to me, "Mr. Terry, before we were opponents. Now we can be friends. We can learn from the past. We can learn from each other. We can work together in the present to make a better future for our children." Amen.